So these are the four pillars. Now, of course, this term could be little difficult since maybe almost all of you are hearing this for the first time, like encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, polymorphism. But don't worry, we will be discussing these pillars one by one. But before that, let's discuss class. So first question, why use class? So let's say we want to track students in our university. So of course students have some basic information, like we know we have name, we have age, we have department, we have joining year and so on. Of course we did write C program using this concept, right? But in normal C programming way, at least, how can we achieve this? So if we write uh, in terms of array, at least we can have like if we consider for 30 students, so we have for name we can have like character name 30 for 30 student, and if we consider 15 as the maximum length of the character for each student, then we can have like this 30 15. So this is for name, and for others like for age, so this would be an integer, so integer age for 30 student, this will be 30 variables. And for department, it could be a string, so we can also consider like this, the same just like name, so it should be department for 30 student, and we may consider the maximum length is like, let's say 5, poly CSC and so on. So just like this using array we can achieve this. Or even if you consider to use structure, then also you can also achieve this, like you can have a structure, since last class we basically dealt with a structure. So then we can have here character name, the 15 as the maximum character, integer age, and so on and so on, the other variables. And here you can define 30 for 30 student, you can have like 30 like this. This is another way. And this particular example, basically this is being shown in Python concept. So in Python, we basically call a list. So a list like this, it is quite similar to array, but another important thing here, we know that in array, of course, the variables should be in same data type, but in list, they could be different data type. Anyway, so that thing is not important, that you need to know what is list. That is not important. The main thing we can compare with this. So using normal C programming, we can achieve like this. So we can use array concept like this, or we can use like structure like this. Now, what is the limitation? So first of all, it will be difficult to manage if the number of employees are large. So that means, let's say, employees means, let's say here the number of students, if we consider. So let's say we have 100 students, then of course this would be 100 variables, 100 different variables, and all we need to access them using these indexes. That means we need to consider the name 0 as the, let's say, the first student, so name 1 as the second student. So it would be difficult to know which students I am referring to, since all these are encoded as different indexes. And even if we use structure, then of course we can write like student 0 dot name is the first student's name. Now we may say that this is quite advantageous than normal array, as we are discussing in our last class as well, that structure is quite suitable rather than array. But then again, it has some other difficulties that we cannot achieve. So class is very similar to structure. Like if you notice, structure has different members, like these we call members. So similar to structure, class has also some members, or we can say the variables there, or the properties or attributes. But class have some other functionalities. If you notice, we don't have any functions here. All we have different variables. These different variable declaration, we call them different member elements. But class can provide more functionality. It can also provide different functions that we will be discussing later. So main thing here, if we even consider this list or this array, so of course this will be difficult to manage if the number of employees are large. That means when the problem will be large, it will be difficult since all we are considering different indexes and so on. And again, this is very similar to our first comment as well, that it will be difficult to remember what is kept in which index. So if let's say 30 students, so we need to remember that different, student 0 is someone and student 1 is another people, student 2 is another people, and so on. So that's why it is difficult to remember that is which index refers to which student or which employee. And since these are difficult, so of course it will be difficult to debug. That means if we found any error at any places, then it will be difficult to debug. It will be difficult to find where is the error. So this type of code can be made more manageable and more maintainable if we use class. Now how? You may of course ask how the classes will be more easier. We will be discussing. Now before that, let's discuss what do we mean by class. So far we are discussing like we need to use class. Just the statement, general statement we discussed. Now let's discuss what is class. So a class is a blueprint for the object. It doesn't actually contain any data. So as I was saying that class is very similar to a structure. So let's discuss the class with respect to a structure. So class is very similar to a structure. As I was saying that the class is the blueprint of object. Now if you remember from our previous class, if we declare like this basically don't allocate any memory. This is the blueprint, what we say. That means we are just saying our user defined, data type, that it will have the name as its member, it will have the age as its member, and so on. These are the blueprints that we are saying. But when we define the structure variable later, like struct student and let's say s1, then we basically first allocated a memory. Now s1.name, s1.age, these are different, defined variables. So then we basically allocated those memories. So it is very similar to class concept. I mean, in class, this particular blueprint, that means this saying what are the properties, what are its attributes, and what are its behaviors. So we mention those in class. Then when we use the class, we call them object. So just like here, when we use the structure, we basically declare the variable. So that's why we are saying like class. So class is a blueprint for the object. It doesn't actually contain any data. It basically mentions how the object will look like. So in class, whatever functions we define are known as methods. Now this thing is new, as I was saying, that structure, within structure we don't have any functions here. What we have different member elements and variables. But we cannot have any function here, like we cannot have add some functions here. We cannot define any functions. But that thing can be done in class. So that's why this is object-oriented programming. So in class, we can have different functions. As I was saying, that an object will have some specific attributes and some behaviors. So attributes are different object like these member variables, like the name, age of person, and of course it will have some functions like walking, talking for persons. So those functions we basically say sometimes as the methods. So methods are basically the functionality that an object created from a class. Basically those method can work with the given data. That means the data we are saying as the attributes. So if I say here, so class, within class, if we consider a box, we have different data. First of all, data means those attributes. Basically it should be object, since object is the something real thing, and we create the object using class anyway. So we write class, and from class, let's say we create the object. Now it has the attributes that mean different data like name, age, and so on, and it has different functions. So function means let's say the walking, talking, and so on. So these functions. So normally what we can do, we can use these attributes within these functions. We'll see later. So we can use these attributes like the name, the age, and the color. Let's say we can use those things within the function itself. That's why it is mentioned here that it can perform with its given data. Data means those attributes, we can use those. Also, we can supply external data as well that are also allowed. Now that was the class. And then what is the object? Here, instance and object are the same thing. So far, what we discussed, the object, that is basically the instance. So instance is an object that is built from a class and contains real data. So class is the blueprint, and then using the blueprint, whatever we created, we call them instance or object. So you may consider like, before creating a building, of course, we plan for it, like the, drawing, the architectural drawing or civil drawing. They plan for the building, like how many rooms will be there, how many bathrooms will be there, how many kitchens, how many windows, how many doors, and so on. So that is the planning, what we may say blueprint, like class. Then when we build a building based on the plan, so we may build multiple building based on same plan, right? Of course, this is possible. Like if you notice, the government buildings, like most probably like Union Parishad buildings or in the city corporation buildings, so you may find that some building has the same structure, or probably government hospitals, few hospitals or community clinic and so on. So they have a specific blueprint or a specific design, and based on the design they are basically implemented in different places like Dhaka, Chittagong, and so on. So you may consider this is the class, and based on that class we basically created different instances at different places. So these instances we call them object. So here it is being said like, if you consider differences between class and instance, or we may say class and object. So class is like a form or questionnaire, and an instance is like a form that has been filled out the information. So if we consider with a Google form, so you know that in midterm or in final, let's say consider for the midterm. So in midterm, what do we had? We have a Google form to submit your answer. So in the Google form, what I created, that is like a class. So in this class, I asked for your name, let's say. I asked for your student ID. Then I asked for your PDF. So that was the blueprint that I created the form. Then I supplied it to all of you. Then you fill your information. So you fill your name, some other student has filled their name, and so on. They fill their ID. So this all name, ID, these are different for different individuals. Also this PDF is different for different individuals. So what we can say that initially it was the class that I created. Then you fill the form. So you basically created different instances from that class. So that's why these are different object we may say. So these are different object is created. Now regarding memory allocation, so when I first created the class, then I didn't allocate any memory for name, add, ID, PDF. I mean, I didn't consume any memory. Of course, you may say that, of course, the Google form has some specific size, let's say 100 kilobyte or 1 megabyte. So that is different. I mean, of course, when you are writing a program, so you are saving the program. So of course, that program will take some amount of memory from your hard drive. But that thing is different. But all I'm saying that these variables or these different forms for different students, they are not consuming any data. But when you are submitting the form, then you are basically using that portion of amount from my Google Drive. So that's why when we declare the class that basically don't allocate any memory. So this is just like a blueprint, what we are talking for last couple of minutes. Then when we create the object, we basically allocate the memory. Like when you submit the form, of course, that amount of space is being, consumed from my Google Drive. So that's why it is being said here that when class is defined, only the description of the object is defined. And then that means I describe, that means you need to put your name and so on and so on. But no memory or storage is allocated at that time. When you submit the form, or I can say when the object is created, we have this, memory is being allocated there.